Well, and we're live. Well, welcome, ladies, gentlemen, extraterrestrials, hobbits, and cryptids, to the Fall Channel, where I do my best to explore world building across science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and occasionally bringing up the world building and elements of my own fiction. Speaking of which, over the next couple of months, hopefully, we can dive into some more themed elements. Sort of like how we did it last year. I think we're going to probably keep the format. Basically, this is a sci fi channel primarily, but we dabble here and there in fantasy or horror or in science fiction that typically, occasionally dives into the fantastical or into the horrific. And I think that's where we're probably going to stay, at least for a little bit. We'll see where we go. So the plan is to dive more into horror in October and do our fantasy stuff in November like we did last year. But over the next few months, I'm thinking about diving more into certain things I grew up with and uh, probably even diving a little bit into my own personal history. We'll get into that in a moment for those of you who are unfamiliar with who I am. But please don't let that dissuade you from taking part in this video. We'll definitely be getting to some of the major points, some of those being that what led to where we're at right now in the Star Trek franchise. We kind of went over this when I did the Section 31 review. Again, this is not a review channel. This is strictly a world building channel, but occasionally there'll be things that come out that I may or may not address the world building for. I think one of the best things I could have did was do a world building analysis of Zack Snyder's monstrosity, the Rebel Moon stuff, and that would have been a perfect exploration into the world building for that. I mean, we could have even gone into the poor world building that was present in, the movie Bright with Will Smith, and that was the one that was written by Max Landis. So there's plenty to do. There's plenty that we should have did, and I don't know if there's some interest. We may come back to it, but we'll see. But right now we're sitting at about 89 subscribers. So we're making it up. We're making a good stride. We're getting there slowly. But little by little, we'll inch our way back towards where I would like us to be. Again, my ambitious goal is to hit 100,000 subscribers by 2030. And so I think we're going to make most of that up through some of these lives. We'll be making it up with shorts and our video essays. So the video essays that I want to do will be not primarily on Star Trek, even though Star Trek is my favorite science fiction franchise. And anything with space, I'm jumping on it almost immediately. Maybe one day we'll do an Expanse thing, or maybe even a deep dive on the other franchise that has Star in it, Star Wars. Although I would love to do something with Stargate and Battlestar Galactica. So science fiction and the space subgenre as a whole, they have no shortage on space-based science fiction. So basically, uh, space-based science fiction have the word star in it. But other than that, yeah, I want to dive into some literature stuff. So we'll get to the books, TV shows, movies, and the like with in due course. But I want to take about the next, hopefully, hour or so, and I want to kind of get into how we got here, where we're going, where I would like to see us go, and what I would do if I was in charge of the whole shebang. So, um, I kind of explored this in super broad strokes in other videos, but I'm going to try to consolidate my thoughts and get us to the nitty gritty of everything. So, basically, where are we now? So, how do we get here? So, as many of you are familiar, those of you who are fans of the franchise, so Star Trek Goes back to the mid 60s, 1966 in particular. Literally next year is the 60th anniversary. And this year I do plan to go to the Star Trek Las Vegas convention. I did last year. Saw a lot of people that I'm familiar with. I didn't reach out to any of them because the kind of schedule I built was very, got to hit each bullet point, each thing. And that ultimately, didn't work out in terms of me trying to go out and like meet other people within the franchise. Um, However, I think it's kind of crazy that my fiance, who will be my wife on this Wednesday, actually, so there'll be a post on Wednesday in the community tab pertaining to that event, and we have a wedding reception about 10 days after. So that's why there's not a whole lot of stuff that's been happening on the channel. Because I'm worrying about my wedding, worrying about just jumping into school as a teacher and as a student in this master's program is its own thing. So again, I thank you for coming to the channel. I thank you for your participation in this, and we'll do our best to address some of the finer points. So I'm jumping around. So basically, who am I? So I'm Philip A. Leavenworth. I'm a educator by day, filmmaker / novelist by night. I have a few credits that you can check on IMDb. There's a portion of it that mentions actor. I'm not an actor. I helped a friend out for a video as like a background actor. That was in 2015. I didn't do much filmmaking after that. Eventually, I did get the bug again because it's one of those things you can't really escape. But I love screenwriting. I love writing scripts. I love telling stories. That's the major thing. Visual storytelling is very popular these days, and so I'm doing my best to get that off the ground. But periodically, it'll get me to the point where I kind of wonder if it's even worth it. And these days, I feel like it is. I've recently involved myself in quite a few Kickstarter projects. Some of them are film related. Some of them are writing related. Some of them are, just things I'm generally interested in. So I've been participating in that and getting that off the ground. And I think it's been pretty I was going to say fertile. It's been very fruitful. It's been helping me reach out to other people, get my name on things. And so that's why there's a big gap on my IMDb between 2015 and 2024. And there'll be several projects added to my IMDb over the next few years and probably forever. So yeah, it'll be building as time goes along. And I'm very excited to see where that goes. Besides that, I have 3 associate's degrees in English, journalism, and creative writing. I'm working on a 4th associate's degree, but it's my first and probably only associate in science, which will be for physical sciences. I received all these associate's degrees from my community college, Long Beach City College. I have a bachelor's degree in English, rhetoric, and composition with a professional writing certificate from California State University, Long Beach. I got that in 2023. And right now I'm working on an MFA degree, a master's degree of fine arts in creative writing, and I'm planning to pursue a doctorate of education in educational leadership from the same school. We'll see what happens, but I will be applying to more schools. We'll see which one lets me, but yeah, we'll see where that goes. But both the master's degree and the doctorate degree are going to be coming from San Diego State University. That's where I am right now, in San Diego, California. And yeah, so that's me in broad strokes. I also worked for the Los Angeles Times for 6 years, and the latest off back in March of 24. So I haven't been involved in that in close to a year, which is kind of crazy to even think about. I did think I was going to work there for at least 10 years. Although there's a side of me that's glad that didn't quite work out that way, because then I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing now. So there's that. So I have a little bit of experience in film. I have a lot of experience in writing. I have a lot of thoughts. So these aren't coming out of nowhere. These are coming from what I think is an educated opinion. So feel free to disagree with me and add that in the comments and see what I can come up with as a retaliatory strike against you. We'll see. But regardless, the big problem that I'm finding in the franchise right now is not the wokeism, is not, you know, the bad leadership, the writing for the C-suite. The problem with the franchise is that it is trying to appeal to too many too quickly and throwing money at whatever they can without having any idea like who they're trying to appeal to. They're just trying to cast the widest net possible with as little interest from anybody, it seems, to even promote any of it. And I think that actually the number one offender of like political bullshit was really Star Trek Discovery. And in general, I do think the franchise is a progressive franchise. I don't think that the franchise is one of those franchises that's conservative by any means. But so many things have been politicized these days that it's hard to kind of figure out what the fuck is going on. So, I try to keep it on a level where I criticize the left, I criticize the right. But as far as I'm concerned, there is I don't even want to call it a moderate middle. I'm talking about this is just me as a person removed from all this other nonsense. What is the average person thinking of this? So here we go. So again, Star Trek started in 1966. Next year it'll be 60 years. That is a feat. That is something that not very many franchises, aside from maybe Doctor Who in the science fiction franchise or the science fiction genre, have done. And for a lot of time, for some reason or another, there's been a big push to modernize the franchise. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think the franchise should evolve. It should change with the times. But I can chalk it down to at least three separate eras of Star Trek history. We have the Roddenberry era, which is actually the smallest. The lion's share of the franchise is this, as it is the smallest part of it. Whereas the Berman era is slightly longer, but both the Roddenberry era and the Berman era are now collectively, at least pretty soon here, they're going to equal in size in terms of duration as the Kurtzman era. And in a couple more years, if Kurtzman sticks around for however long it is, I think his contract is up next year, but I don't think his actual stuff terminates until 27. So I think we're stuck with him for at least another 2 years. So that's not ideal, obviously. But at the end of the day, Kurtzman is a popcorn filmmaker trying to make a franchise that is philosophical at its heart and thought-provoking in the brain. So he's not known for doing this. He's primarily, like I said, a popcorn filmmaker. And you can tell that immediately from watching Star Trek 2009. Because if you watch it, you will find out that the franchise, I mean, that film, I think, is good in terms of strictly, its opening. The opening, I think, is one of the best openings in the Star Trek movies, in any Star Trek movie. I even think the opening to Star Trek Into Darkness is pretty good. And I kind of went over this in another video, but I think the opening of that film is the only redeemable part of that film. Because ultimately, I do think that what we end up with that particular film is we end up with an interesting premise that ultimately they move away from and they turn it into some kind of a bizarre remake of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. They're always trying to remake Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan because they know that's the most popular film. They know that's the most popular item that the franchise ever created that basically revitalized the franchise. And, I guess they're right for wanting to remake it, but I mean, it's kind of like how every once in a while the Star Wars franchise will try to remake any number of the elements from the original trilogy. And it's like, are these people so creatively bankrupt that they can't come up with new ideas, new challenges? Because at the time that Star Wars came out, it was something new, something, unique. Now, Star Trek, I think, in a way, because somebody was saying that Star Trek is sort of like a James Bond franchise where Like James Bond doesn't create the trend; it goes by trends, whereas Star Trek doesn't create the trend; it goes by a trend. And I think that kind of mindset should change in the franchise. I think that we should be moving toward being a trendsetter, not being a trend follower. Arguably, the franchise has never been a trend setter, but I think that that's partially why the franchise has been sort of stunted in its popularity and interest. But I don't think it's impossible to achieve a level where the franchise is now. Um, I don't think it'll ever eclipse something like Star Wars or Halo, even, but I think it can get close. I think it can get much, much better. And I don't think this can be done by catering to culture war bullshit. And I don't think this can be done by catering to um, extremist um, politics in any case, left or right. Again, Star Trek Discovery, I think, was the biggest defender, and I think even people who are of that proclivity have come out and they've said that for whatever reason that didn't work for them because it was so like ham-fisted and not really honest. And I think that's an interesting perspective that some of the so-called leftists uh, have been perceiving. So when it comes to me and my interest, obviously I didn't grow up with I mean, I did grow up with them, but I wasn't raised at a point where those were coming out live. Like the original series was like a 30-year-old property by the time I was, up and, watching Star Trek on my own. So, I'd watch the VHS tapes that my dad had for the original series, and I fell in love with the show. I prefer the despecialized. If there's a despecialized version, it's good. But we got some comments. All right, RRTNZ. Sorry, it's okay if you can't stick around, but I appreciate all the attention. Definitely come back. I welcome any sorts of conversation. I welcome debate. I welcome it all. So please come by again. But regardless, it's always good to have people reacting to things, as you can see here. Keep our Star Trek on point. So, excuse me. It's a little dry today. Dry and cold makes no sense. But anyway, so the original series was something that I did grow up with. Just I didn't see it live. It was on VHS tapes, and the same thing with the Next Generation. But the first Star Trek film I ever saw in the theater was the Next Generation, and so watching the Next Generation, specifically First Contact, was crazy because I thought the film was amazing. I thought everything was working well, and I mentioned this sort of in other lives and other comments I've made. But that's one of my oldest childhood toys that I still have is the Phoenix that they I forget who exactly produced it, but I had um, that model, and I had that heirloom from that film, and we were there for Insurrection. My dad, my brother, and I, and then it was just my dad and I when we went to watch Nemesis. And Nemesis, I don't think is a good film, although people give it shit for the ATV sequence. But me, as a person who enjoys desert, activities, um, I was fine with it. The things I wasn't fine with was like narrative decisions, like um, pulling a sort of Star Trek to the Wrath of Khan with the death, supposedly, of Data, which I don't agree with, um, which is kind of surprising. But for whatever reason, that's how they chose to end Nemesis. That's how they chose to leave us, with that cliffhanger. And we ended up with a nice little lull in terms of Star Trek films for a good 7 years. And then we get the Kurtzman stuff. So I'm very familiar with the Berman era of Star Trek. And I don't say it's my preferred era. I do think Berman, as a creator, as a showrunner, should have taken more risks, even though the risk he did take was pretty enormous at the time. Because I mean, just look at Deep Space Nine and the risks that they were taking with that series. I mean, the Star Trek series had never done a war, situation, at least on that scale. And then we get it fully rendered and fully explained and fully realized. And that's one of the things that I think is sort of amazing about it. One of these days, my fiance and I are going to finish the Deep Space Nine little rewatch we've kind of started. I'm hoping we can finish that by the time we go to the convention in August. I think we're just about to start season 6 of Next Gen, so we're kind of watching Deep Space Nine season 1 and the Next Generation season 6 kind of simultaneously. So yeah, we'll have to see how that all shakes out because at the moment it's a little complicated. I wanted us to be a lot more further ahead than we are at the moment for the franchise. Um, yeah, it's going to be very interesting how we do all this. But again, so the Berman era is the one I'm most associated with. But I was watching Voyager when it aired live. Seeing, a female captain was not something I even thought of as like a problem when I was growing up. Seeing a woman in charge doing anything like that has never been a question. I've never thought a woman can't be a leader. I've never thought a woman, could command a spaceship. I was never against any role a woman could have in a leadership position. I think they could always do it. And so that's sort of the reason why, I seem to embrace more progressive ideas. And, without these, what I call Star Trek values, I wouldn't be who I am today. So, I don't think that Star Trek teaches you to be a weak man. If anything, I think it teaches you to be a very strong male figure. And I think it forces you as a person to be a role model for other men, other women even, who may pursue similar roles that you may or may not have somewhere down the line. So in general, the Berman era ends with season 4 of Enterprise, but by then, like I would say they're pretty much checked out. Brandon Braga and Rick Berman's, they create a finale episode, which is sort of the only way I can kind of break it down for myself to make any sense is to basically have this, it's not an ending for Enterprise, it's an ending for the entire Berman era. And I think that's the biggest problem with it, is that it's not a love letter to the fans of Enterprise, it's a love letter to his own career. Because essentially, you don't bring in Next Gen into Enterprise because you're trying to make a reference somehow or another to something cyclical within the franchise. You bring it in because it's your last hurrah with the Star Trek franchise, and you're just doing it to essentially cap off a significant amount of time within the franchise. 'Cause I think from '91, I think that's when Jesus Christ, Gene Roddenberry passed away in 1991, and so when Rick Berman signs off for the last time in 2005, that was like a 14-year stint as the chief content creator of the Star Trek franchise for Paramount. And once that was all said and done, that was all. That was all she wrote. She was done. And then Star Trek is basically on ice for 4 years. And then it comes back under new leadership, and that leadership being Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, and J.J. Abrams. The two former people are the principal writers of Star Trek 2009, and J.J. Abrams is the filmmaker of Star Trek 2009. So we have this new blood injected into the franchise. It's changing everything. And to this day, only one of those people have stuck around, and that is Alex Kurtzman. And again, Alex Kurtzman's credits before this was, Transformers. He's produced mostly, again, popcorn films. these films that he makes, they're not designed for Star Trek fans. And I don't really agree with the notion that we should just hand the franchise over to fans. I don't think that's always the best move. Because they literally, after Star Trek the Motion Picture, they hired a director, Robert Wise, um, fairly well known director, I think, at the time. But he intended to make like a 2001 more philosophical film. I think Star Trek the Motion Picture is the only Star Trek film that understands the essence of what Star Trek is. Star Trek is a philosophical franchise. It is not a popcorn franchise like Star Wars. But they keep trying to make Star Wars. They keep trying to put Star Wars into Star Trek, and I don't think it's always successful. Now, Star Trek can have action. It can have balls to the wall action for all we care. And it works. We know it does. We've seen it. But I think at its heart, there should always be a philosophical bent to everything. There should be conflicts, wars that are weighted in a certain direction, that are not constantly trying to, just be a rehash of something else that was better earlier. I think the franchise is better when it makes a difference in something that's never been tried. And I think that's where the Alex Kurtzman era technically is successful. Because you have, within the Star Trek franchise, you have, just in the last few years under Kurtzman, a flurry of new shows. I mean, we didn't have any of these things. And we even had sequels that had come out to earlier work. Because we had, it starts off with these three films, or the Kelvin timeline, which begins in the Prime timeline with the destruction of Romulus in 2387. So what you end up with that is this ongoing thread, which is still kind of surprising to me that that's what they did. But that is such an impactful change to a timeline that we're going to see reverberations of it, or ripples of it. We see it in Star Trek Discovery, the later seasons when they jump to the 31st or whatever century. So these actions have consequences, and in that way, the franchise is never going to return to what it was. I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing. We'll get into some of the other stuff in a minute, but um, we have, from these three films, we have an entire franchise that gets built. We get Star Trek Discovery in 2017, and that runs for 5 seasons. I have not seen the last two. I've only seen, I think, 3 of them, and I think the change to the 31st century was a solid narrative decision. Whereas I'm suspicious of some of the. I'm not suspicious of the politics as much. I'm more suspicious of the decision to start the show in the 23rd century and then jump us to that just because they felt like they needed to fulfill the sort of mandate that the show should follow in the footsteps of the other parts of the franchise, where you jump to the future, and we're not doing this thing where Discovery is trying to pick up or live off of the entrails of earlier, better work. But ultimately, we have to be thankful for Discovery existing, because ultimately, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have Anson Mount's portrayal of Captain Pike. And I think that was sort of an interesting narrative decision. Although I think it's going to lead to something that's very terrifying. We'll get into that too in a minute. So, yeah, so on its face, we had Discovery come in, we had Strange New Worlds come in, we had Lower Decks, we had Prodigy, we had Picard, and that's been the franchise so far. That's been the breadth of Kurtzman shit on the franchise. So, what has this led to? What has this done for us? Ultimately, I think it has expanded the franchise to a level that I didn't think was possible. And maybe that's good for it. I have no idea. We'll see what happens with that. But we'll come back to that in a second. We have ads. So ad time. So, the fall channel is brought to you by Vega Aerospace. Vega Aerospace in space. No one can hear you. All right, back to the show. So here's the big problem. We have a franchise that's run by basically a guy who's making Star Trek for the C-suite. He's not making Star Trek for the fans. Not that you have to make Star Trek for the fans necessarily, because again, Star Trek is great when you don't have a fan involved. Now, I know you're kind of looking at me funny. Hear me out. So the thing is, Star Trek To the Wrath of Khan was directed by Nicholas Meyer, who before doing that first movie, he did Star Trek 6. Before that, he was not a fan, but he jumped in and he made it his own. And through that kind of fresh eyes, fresh lenses, Nicholas Meyer made the best to this day Star Trek film. And that's why they keep on trying to remake it all the time. So I think you don't need a fan trying to make shit for the fans. I think that's a Zack Snyder sort of mentality, and I personally don't agree with it. I think the franchise needs to find someone fresh, someone new that can take it over. I think the franchise needs a Kevin Feige, not that particular person, and we don't need Kevin Feige himself. We need a figure like that. We need somebody who's got control over the entire apparatus, who has the entire franchise to overlook and oversee, and give the authority, thumbs up, thumbs down. That's one of the things I think that Kurtzman is kind of like not doing. Like, I don't think he really has that much control as people think on the franchise. I think he kind of, says, okay, it's good, we'll see, and then they bounce out. But I don't really know if that's going to be the case. I don't know if we're going to get there, but we'll see. We have comments. I think the franchise needs to get rid of all the people who are trying to mess with it and make it their own. Well, it's kind of complicated. I think that there's nothing wrong with making something their own as long as it's still like within the bounds of whatever thing it is. Again, like Nicholas Meyer with Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. He literally went in and made it his own, but he made it within the confines of how Star Trek is built, and that's what you need. You don't need to like do what Star Wars did with, because I think there's an extreme. You can have somebody who doesn't know anything about the franchise and then have them jump on it and make it their own thing. But then you could do the opposite of that effect, and you could do Star Wars: The Last Jedi, which I've kind of grown to appreciate because at least it was trying something different and new. Now, whether or not it's great, it's up to you, up to most of us. But ultimately, in my opinion, I think the extreme is if you have somebody like a Ryan Johnson who comes in there and he's, I'm going to make it my own thing, but then he kind of deviates from what the core of the franchise does and what it is and changes it into something that the franchise has never done before, but he changes it in such a way that it's so removed from what it's done in the past that it feels alien. And I feel like there's ways you can do that without sort of, stepping all over what's been established. And I think one of the ways that it's been done in other franchises, like, you have Star Trek, or no, you have the Terminator movies. Like, these are the same filmmaker, but, even that filmmaker was willing to make a change because you have the Terminator and you have the Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So Terminator 1, the Terminator is essentially just a microcosm of that entire franchise. It's the independent film of that franchise, and in that movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the villain, and then they decide to make a different choice in the second film because obviously you can't have Arnold, who's now turned himself into a hero. You can't have him play a villain again because so much time has passed now that people appreciate him as a hero character, as a heroic character. And so when he pops up in T2, he's now the hero. And now you have the best film of the franchise. So I think we should embrace change. We should embrace experimentation, but I think there is a cost, and it's a line we have to be very careful for. But it's also a thing where I'm kind of wondering, like, who the hell do they put in charge of these things? that they just constantly do shit that they wonder why people don't go to see them, and it's like you're making decisions and you're not like critically thinking about it, like, oh, that'll print money, so yeah, let's do that. It's bad business, and it's surprising any of these people with the MBAs, the bean counters, are able to get away with this for years. But the biggest turnoff for me was when J.J. Abrams came in and alternate universed everything. Klingons no longer looked like Klingons, destroying Vulcan in the um, original series timeline, stuff like that. Well, I think you raise an interesting perspective because ultimately, I do think alternate universes are fun and they're cool, but when you do them just for the sake of doing them without like a purpose, like that's when things get complicated. Because I mean, look at all the ways they've done alternate history, alternate universe stuff in the franchise already. Like, there's a reason why this shit happens. Like, they do things that kind of make sense within the context of the story. Like yesterday's Enterprise. Why is it such a great episode? Because we don't know before that episode, we didn't know anything about the Enterprise C. We didn't know anything about the history of it, and it helps provide context and it helps kind of fill in the gaps there. Whereas with the Star Trek 2009 stuff, it literally kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, um, the villain Nero. Like, the only thing that's kind of a thread is that we know from the episode Unification in the Next Generation. Oh, excuse me. We know that from that episode alone, that Spock was working to sort of bridge a gap or create a unification between the Romulans and the Vulcans. And ultimately, now that J.J. Abrams has, or rather the Orsi Kurtzman folks have made their decision and have changed the franchise with this one simple decision by destroying Romulus, I think we kind of lose something that I don't even think they're familiar with. Because obviously, I don't think Kurtzman really thinks things through. He thinks like, "What's cool?" It's kind of like J.J. Abrams in that way, and I think that's kind of. It's not that it's bad storytelling. It's just like ill-informed hackery, we'll call it, because ultimately what he did was because the whole idea in the franchise, at least from the Berman era beyond that, was you had this notion that the Klingon Empire was sort of the Soviet Union. Because when we get to Star Trek Six, you have this element where you know the destruction of Praxis is essentially the Chernobyl disaster. That's what they're trying to say led to the end of the Soviet Union, and I think that that's kind of interesting as an idea. But then again, they were also playing up the idea that even in the Next Generation, that the Romulan Empire was sort of a stand-in for China, but now they've done this thing where Romulus is destroyed, so now that whole element that Romulus and China, as a concept, as an analogy, it doesn't work anymore. Because as far as we're aware, China is still going strong and it's getting more powerful. So yeah, we have a problem. But you raise another good point. So TOS was great, but before my time, TNG was my childhood. DS9 was pretty amazing once you got into it. Voyager was kind of weak in the writing department, but still felt like the same universe. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think Voyager is the one I grew up with watching live, and I have more attachment to that than I have most other parts of the franchise. For me, Star Trek Voyager, I think, achieved something that other parts of the franchise hasn't, and that is get us to a point where there's no Starfleet, there's nobody coming to save them. It is strictly, they're on their own. They have their own stuff. Now, the problem with that, and maybe on some degree I do agree with you, the writing is weak in terms of, every episode has this goddamn reset button that ruins everything, and it doesn't give us forward momentum or continuity. And I think that's just that's Berman for you and the era that he was a part of. So I don't really understand why they would shut down storytelling possibilities like that, but I wasn't in the writing room then. I don't know if I would have been allowed in that room by then. Even Enterprise was fun, but plausibility fit into the overall timeline as an early origin story. I mean, that's kind of complicated too, because I kind of feel like we have a really bizarre situation with Enterprise where the NX-01 like is more advanced than the original series Enterprises. Just if you look around the bridge and the different um, like the sort of like flat screen plasma TVs that they had everywhere, and those items are a lot more sophisticated. So that's why some people have suggested, and I'm kind of starting to believe that we're kind of living in a timeline that's created out of the issues that were started in First Contact, and I think that's kind of weird. But I think that's fine to an extent because I think this third timeline about where you have the point of divergence be 2063 Montana First Contact, and then you lead that into Enterprise. That explains why things are more advanced because now they had foreknowledge. And then from that same element, you have what we see in Discovery, which is way more advanced than way more advanced than what we saw in the original series. And they kind of give us a halfway decent explanation of why that is, but some people disagree with it. But no, I think you're raising a lot of good points. I know there is a lot of criticism against Discovery and Picard, but at least they don't disturb the existing universe too much. Well, I think that's true, more or less. I think Discovery definitely stops making uh, major issues with the franchise after they jump to the future because now they're kind of in an area where they don't have to worry about stepping on the toes of another part of the franchise. I just think they're too far out into the future to where we're kind of like there's no like we can't relate to it as much, and I feel like that's to its detriment. And I feel like that series would have benefited more from us not having done that jump so far into the future. I think maybe would it have really been so bad to put Discovery just like maybe a little bit after Picard, like at some point in the middle of the 25th century or something? I don't, but again, I wasn't a part of the writing staff, nor do I think they would let me in there. But beyond that, we have we're going through the Kurtzman era now, and that's kind of where I want us to focus. So is Star Trek dead? That's the central question I started with. That's the central question that I want to finish with. Now we got a little bit more time, so I'm gonna try to answer that question. So what we have now is Lower Decks is done, much to my sadness. Prodigy is done, which is also another thing that I think is sad because I think Star Trek needs a like Vanguard show that's kind of like going to the kids and teaching them, very valuable lessons about, growing up and being a kid and, maturing, growing up. We need that. We need that in the franchise. We need, youngsters to join the franchise, use that as their entry point, and then, watch the rest of it and see what they like. And I think with over 800 episodes of the franchise so far, I think they have plenty to go through. It'll take them many years to dive through all of it. But I think that we need something like that. And Lower Decks is obviously the inverse of that, where it's definitely not a kid show, but it is something that I think brings a lot of the older fans together. I mean, I know there's a lot of older fans who don't like Lower Decks. I think partially because of the humor and some of the other elements that are present in it, but um, I don't know. I liked Lower Decks quite a bit, and it's kind of a shame most people kind of shined it on. But now that's over. I mean, they left it off in a point where I think we're kind of open to having more continuations of it, and because it's animated, they've opened themselves up to doing like an animated movie, which I think would be cool. I think Star Trek should have more animated movies. I don't think we haven't done any of those, so I think we could, and that would be great. And I even have some ideas myself, and we'll get into that toward the end too. So with all these things ending, it's kind of giving you the impression that Star Trek is dead. But I feel like Star Trek is on the edge of a rebirth. But this rebirth can only happen with the creative end or departure of Alex Kurtzman, because I feel like he's had the franchise in some capacity since 2009. So this is remember what I said. Rick Berman had the franchise from 1991 to 2004 or 2005. So that's 14 years of controlling one IP. Kurtzman has controlled this thing in some capacity since 2009. That, as of this year, is 16 years. So his tenure as the ruler of Star Trek has gone on for longer than the period that Berman was part of the franchise. So I just want you to sit with that for a moment. I feel like there is a expiration date on a creator working on any project, and I think that he's gone on too long. I think as of right now, I think we only have the two coming up. We have Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, the next season, and then we have Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, and that's going to be a continuation of Star Trek Discovery's elements. So you have that to consider as we move the franchise forward as well. So we have a lot of elements, a lot of balls in the air. Where are things going to land? We have no idea, and that's part of the problem. But I'm hoping that whatever happens with this deal that they have going with Skydance and some of the other ones that have come out trying to bid for the Paramount rights, I can only hope that whoever wins out, they decide to get Kurtzman off and get rid of him and replace him with somebody better. But honestly, I don't know who we could put. I mean, I posed this question to the Admiral Teague YouTube channel, and a lot of them came up with tons of different answers, although the one that I agreed with the most, and I was kind of pushing myself, was putting Seth MacFarlane at the head of the franchise. And I know he would love to do it. We've already seen he can do it with the series The Orville. So the only difference would be that I think at that point he would probably abandon a little bit of his stereotypical or trademark humor, which I think he's kind of weaved in and out of all of his stories. So, in my view, if they got somebody like Seth MacFarlane to lead the franchise, I think the franchise would have a bright future. And I mean, Seth MacFarlane isn't really that old either. So I mean, he could potentially run the franchise for a significant amount of time, and I think you'd end up with some good stuff. And I think he would be open, because I mean, it's not even just the Orville, because he did the Cosmos stuff, because he did Cosmos, the Space Time Odyssey, and then he did the Cosmos, the Possible Worlds. And I haven't seen Possible Worlds yet, so I want to check that out. But with all these elements, we know that I think he is capable of doing it. I know he's capable of even hiring writers from the Star Trek Berman era, because he already hired Andre Bormanis and Brandon Braga to, kind of contribute to the Orville in some capacity. So I think the rebirth of Star Trek is contingent on the hiring of Seth MacFarlane or somebody similar. But again, with Kurtzman at the head of everything, that's partially unlikely. And if they renew his contract for another, I don't know, let's say they renew it out to 2030, I have no idea what more damage he can do to the franchise. Like, I don't think he's done such a lot. I mean, there's shows he's done that I agree with, but he's not the man that needs to lead the franchise into the future. He's just not. I get the impression they're grasping at straws to try to tell new stories that don't feel repetitive and going for increasingly fantastical time travel / alternate universe / alternate history, etc. I mean, partially, to an extent. I think that it's not just about trying to cash in social justice points. It's not just about trying to, do something different. I think that they don't know how to. These are not science fiction writers. These are TV writers. A lot of the writers that work on Discovery and some of the other shows, they come from sitcoms or cop dramas or stuff like that. they don't come from sci-fi. I mean, I'm all for people trying to do something different with their writing, but these people have constantly shown that their mindset is not in the same zone as the writers that came before them in the franchise. I mean, I would love us to return to the original series days where we would hire actual science fiction writers. I mean, they did it in the original series. You know, you had Harlan Ellison. The animated series, they brought in Larry Niven. So, I mean, why can't we go back to that? I mean, there's a slew of writers that would chomp at the bit to just jump on Star Trek. I mean, few I can think of is, John Scalzi. Um, we have. I mean, it's sad what's happened to Peter David. I would love him to get involved in some capacity in this new group, but it's unlikely he would. But I definitely wouldn't want to hand the franchise over to William Shatner because I don't know. I know a lot of people like the Shatnerverse stuff, and the books are weird artifacts of a very specific time. But um, yeah, I don't know if that's where the franchise should go. I think, especially since Mr. Shatner is encroaching on his 95th year of life, and I've met him twice. I've met William Shatner twice. He's all there. I know it for the most part. He's an old ass man, but I know he can probably do still quite a lot. But you know, I don't know if he would be the guy to do it, especially since he's not really the writer. Because even the Shatnerverse stuff was kind of worked out between Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens, so it's not. They were the writers on it. He would kind of spit ideas, and then they would kind of synthesize it and put it down on paper. So that's that distinction. And then you have a couple of these other writers that I think would be interesting to put on the franchise. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'd be willing to take writers of a left wing persuasion and a right wing persuasion and put them in the same room and to see what commonalities would come out. I think it'd be an interesting experiment. But yeah, again, I'm not running it. I would love to at some point, but I don't know. I think this is going to be the moment that you guys are either going to say, "Fuck you! You don't know what you're talking about. Get out, get off Star Trek." But it's my beloved franchise. I would love to run it, and I would love to do shit that would blow your minds. But we'll talk a little bit about that right now. So I would love to canonize. That means put it on some kind of screen in visual format. I would love to canonize Star Trek: New Frontier and make Captain Mackenzie Calhoun a actual physical embodiment of that, a manifestation of that character. Getting back to the Peter David stuff. So if we could have Captain Mackenzie Calhoun, I don't know who we would cast to play that character. I would either prefer it to be done in an animated format. That way we can kind of get away with some elements, or you know, a live action. I mean, a live action Star Trek New Frontier would be insane to me. And not only that, I would love to canonize other pocketbook series that they had. I mean, I would love to make Star Trek, Starfleet Corps of Engineers. I would love to make that sort of an anthology TV show, and I would love to do Star Trek Vanguard, Star Trek New Earth that turns into Star Trek Challenger, which they didn't get to finish. And then, man, there's so much that I would love to canonize. I feel like I would spend most of my tenure just canonizing shit. But beyond that, I don't see myself. I probably wouldn't canonize much of the relaunch stuff because I think some of that kind of gets a little muddled. I know Star Trek Destiny kind of goes off into little areas like the Typhon Pact and stuff like that. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to doing a Star Trek, canonizing Star Trek Titan, that book series, but I think that one would be probably strictly animated because, I mean, a lot of time has passed, and the perfect time to have done a Star Trek Titan show would have been when the books were being written in the mid 2000s. Because, right now, Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis are not the young people they were 20 years ago, younger people they were 20 years ago. So, yeah, I don't think that's possible, but I think an animated show would definitely work for that particular thing. And yeah, that would be what I would do. But I I don't know. A lot of people don't like Star Trek Picard season 3. I enjoyed it better than 1 and 2, and I actually think it's put me on the Terry Matalas side of the franchise. I haven't met Terry Matalas, but I saw him at Star Trek Las Vegas, and I wanted to talk to him, but the guys from Trek Yards were there, and they were kind of blocking my way. But I actually tried to meet them too, and didn't get a chance to. It was so much to do. I don't think now I think about it, I don't think I can do 2 days at Star Trek Las Vegas again. I got to do at least 3 or 4 to make it like to do everything I want to do. So we'll keep that a note. But one of the things I've always wanted to do, and I know that some people don't like the alternate history stuff, but I mean I love it. It's one of my favorite things. I don't like the time travel stuff too much because that stuff kind of always comes back to the same plot line, which is time travel is kind of bad. It should only be used to observe stuff, or don't do time travel because you end up changing things too badly. And ultimately, I think all this does is kind of like, in the desire to kind of create new stories, they're ultimately falling back on old tropes, and I think that's the danger. But I'm hoping that they can slowly but surely stop being so afraid to take challenges and do something philosophical and different. Do something new with it. I mean, also, I would love to canonize Star Trek Elite Force, like make a hazard team like canon. That would be dope. I would do what Section 31 was supposed to do, kind of. But also watch my Section 31 review. I went on for an hour and a half. I did drift off away from it because it's you know if Section 31 is the future of the franchise, Star Trek is probably going to die very, very soon, and it's going to die a slow, agonizing death. And if for some reason they say, well, it's still printing us money, it's still getting a bunch of attention, tons of people are watching it, because that's kind of the barometer. If it makes money, that's all that matters. And I think that that's part of the problem with modern Hollywood and the modern executive, logic or illogic, because you end up with this stupid shit that you end up with. So, no, ideally. Although, if you take all of these elements that I've just discussed that I would canonize, I would just kind of pick items that I like from each one and then like synthesize them into one new Star Trek thing. And I do love the idea of getting lost somewhere. I mean, that kind of goes back to my love of Space 1999. It goes back to Star Trek Voyager. It goes back to even Stargate Universe. But, I like the idea of being out there without any guardrails, where resources are scarce, where things are actually fucking dangerous and scary, and there's no reset button. People die and they won't come back, and they could be people you care about. And yeah, that's the kind of stuff I want from my Star Trek eventually. I want to make something that is not only philosophical but very emotional. I don't want melodrama. I don't mind sentimentality. I think sentimentality is cool. Just it has to be done in a tasteful way that doesn't seem too emotionally manipulative. And I think that's done to a great degree. I mean, some people don't agree with me, but the film Bicentennial Man, I think, is actually pretty good for this. And Gattaca, to an extent, I wouldn't call it sentimental. I'd call it more just standard dramatic stuff. But ultimately, I do think Star Trek needs to create a rule where you can have your rule of cool, you can have your cool stuff in there, and you can also do your, your rule of drama. But again, I want us to get away from being dramatic for drama's sake and melodramatic. See, like, I don't have an issue technically with soap opera drama. It just has to be tasteful, if anything. And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of these writers is that I don't think they can get themselves out of their own mindset of how they used to write stuff, and so that's a problem. But we're about an hour in. So, in broad strokes, is Star Trek dead? No. Is it on life support? I'd say so, at least until this deal goes through and we see what comes from that, who they put in charge. If they keep Kurtzman, if they don't, that's going to be the contingent that we have to consider. And then, based on that, that's where we'll see the rebirth of the franchise. Um, I mean, there's a little bit of fandom out there right now that I think is going pretty strong. We have I don't know if anybody's seen the Krakatoa class starship kind of fan fiction that's been built up. You also have Star Trek Audacious that I'll be contributing to at some point. I got to reach out to the writer Don Spix about that one because I feel like there's a communication issue. I don't know if it's me or him, but either way, I want to contribute to that comic in some manner or another. But I'd even like to, contribute in some fashion to the guy, because I'm actually a contributor to the Trek Yards channel. You'll see my at the end of those videos, you have the ships, and you have the Patreon contributors, and then you have like different rates of everybody. You have like the Starfleet Command, and then you have the captains, commanders, the admirals. Everybody. I think I'm in the ensign tier still. So if you see Fleet Admiral Levi in there or Fall, yeah, that's me. So if you're on Trek Yards, you'll see it. But yeah, after this episode, we're not going to focus so much on Star Trek as much, at least not until the new season of Strange New Worlds comes out. And I probably won't cover Strange New Worlds as a whole until a while. I do plan to do more of like a deep dive on the history of the franchise, maybe even like break down retrospectives on how I feel about every series instead of every episode. I don't know if I'm ever going to do like dedicate myself like I have with the anti-derivative Jill channel, where I was joining her as a co-host for the For All Mankind reviews. I don't think I would do that on my own channel unless I was convinced to do it. But um, I don't know. Maybe there's something there. But I think we're going to kind of stick to the schedule of Mondays. We post video essay. The first video essay I plan to do will be released on February 24th. It will be related, oddly enough, to alternate history. I'm going to do a lot of video essays that are kind of related to what I'm interested in, as well as what I'm writing. So keep that open for you. And then Wednesdays are going to be kind of random, where I kind of post either excerpts from videos or random little clips that I've taken of stuff around the area, or random things I've done around town and stuff. And then Fridays, they will be the live stream days like today. Actually, today was a pretty good live stream, considering the fact that most times I do live streams, I don't get very many comments. But I thank those of you who have commented, and I thank everyone who's watching still or in the future, especially in the replay. I think we're going to get more people in the replay. The Section 31 review got 115 views, which is a record for the podcast. It's not a record for all podcasts, of course, but we are still kind of just starting out. I mean, we did start the channel back in May. We started the podcast in July, and then we kind of did a weekly breakdown of different properties. I mean, we started this channel with AI generated videos because I was kind of curious how that would even work and how terrible they ended up. So that was all an experiment to show that AI can't generate YouTube videos, at least not without a significant amount of modulation. So doing that, I think, was very much a learning experience. Now, on this channel, I'm not opposed to AI as a concept. I think AI is a great tool. It's just another tool in the toolbox. The same way a typewriter or a laptop helps you synthesize things. I don't think AI can destroy anything, at least not yet. It is a tool. It's not a replacement, but it will be a replacement if you turn it into one. So it's very important to keep mindful of that. I might even do a poll to kind of get an idea of where my audience is. in terms of like AI generated thumbnails or stuff of that nature. I'm not going to do AI videos again because I feel like those typically come out way too wacky, and I don't like that. So we're probably not doing that. But I can't afford right now to hire people to design better thumbnails. I think the ones that I've been doing so far are kind of okay. But thank you to Canva for that. Um, I did try to design at least one other one through Adobe, so there's that. But either way, before I sign off here, I just want to tell you guys that there's going to be a lot more content to this channel. There's going to be a lot more subjects that we're going to explore. We're going to dive into Mass Effect, a lot of video games, Mass Effect, Halo, um, even Star Trek Voyager Elite Force. I'd love to do a retrospective about that. Um, Not to mention um, several other novels that I've read over the years, book series. I'd love to build on some of the stuff that I covered in my earlier work on the channel with Foundation, Dune, and the culture novels. Culture novels are the big one. That's going to be the big deep dive. But I got to read more of the books before I do that in a larger scope. So there's a lot of fun things in store for this channel. I hope you all stick around, and I hope you who are watching it now or in the future in the replay come back. I hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and yeah, this is just the beginning. And I have faith that my beloved franchise will return to its glory days and go to some very amazing places. I think the only thing I'm afraid of right now is if they try to remake Star Trek, the original series. I kind of feel like they're going to do that after they conclude Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So let that be a lesson. But without further ado, again, I thank you all for listening and tuning in and yeah, doing all the things. So I'll be signing off. But remember, don't panic and not forget your towel. And until next time, so long and thanks for all the fish.